Hello and a very warm welcome to students, parents and carers watching. This video is designed to give you some key information and an overview of what is happening with exams this year 2021. We understand that for many of you this has been quite an unsettling period, and at Thamesview School we want to make sure that at every stage of this process we're offering you as much information as possible and as much guidance as possible to help you achieve your very best. So let's start with an overview. So you returned to school on Monday 8th of March and we are so pleased to see you all back. You then have a 4-week period of learning and possible assessment. Now, we've put possible assessment there in the slide because at the moment we're still determining the best way forward for us as a school and you as our students in terms of when we assess you. And I'll give you some more information on that in just a moment. You then have the Easter break that begins on Friday 2nd of April and it finishes Sunday 18th of April, meaning that you come back to us on Monday the 19th of April. So you do then have a 2-week period over Easter that's the perfect time for you to be doing revision and continuing with your learning even though you're not in school. You then come back and that's a 5-week term, and I've said here that this is a period of learning and assessment, so at some point with dates to be confirmed as soon as possible you will have some kind of internal exams for definite in that period. So the big question, how will grades be decided? It's really important that you understand where we are getting this data from. There's lots and lots out there in the press and the media about what schools are doing and the difficulties schools are facing, but actually we feel that we've got a really secure approach to this and we want to make sure that you understand what that approach is. So let's make it really clear. At the moment, we have not finished working out how each subject specifically will determine your grade. That's a really lengthy, complicated process. And as I'm sure you can imagine, having only received information quite recently, we want to make sure we really get that right. And it's not going to be the same for every subject. As soon as we have that information, as soon as we have determined how your grade will be decided in each of your subjects, we will make sure that you know, and you will get an overview that tells you the information for every single one of your subjects. As I've said, it's a complex and lengthy process and we're absolutely committed to getting it right for you. I'm going to give you 3 examples, and I'm really going to stress here that these are examples of how we could, for different subjects, approach the grades so that you start to have a bit of an understanding about the ways that we might be doing this. So let's start with this example here on the screen. This is maths. So the first thing and the main thing we might use are internal tests. So we'll be using materials from the exam boards, and the exam boards are all publishing materials for schools to use for internal tests. We will not assess topics that we have not been able to teach you. It's really essential that you understand that we will not be looking to test you on things that we haven't been able to give you the opportunity to learn. But in addition to that, we won't be holding back content that we think is essential for you to know moving forward into the next stage of your education. So there's a lot there for us to think about in terms of our next stages with you, but there will be some kind of internal exams. We might then also need to use some topic tests, and these might be on quite specific things and for specific people. So let's say, for example, that we weren't certain whether you had fulfilled the criteria for one of the highest grades. If you're a student really aiming for those grades 8s or 9s, we might then want to give you a very specific topic test that's on some more challenging material, just to make sure that we have enough evidence to say that we think that you are a grade 8 or a grade 9 student in maths in this example. So that's where we might need additional evidence. And then the last thing is that we might need to look at previous data. So that could be previous assessment, previous in-class assessment, previous class work, homework, that kind of thing. And that might be in the situation where you have perhaps been personally affected by COVID and there are larger gaps in your learning than there are for other people. So that might be on a really individual basis. But as I say, this is one example of how we might approach a subject like maths. The second example is for something like sport. So you've been working towards an NEA, and this coursework will continue to count towards your overall grade. So that still stands. If there's then a theory exam involved, that exam will happen internally, but like with other subjects where you haven't been taught material or there are some perhaps gaps in content, you'll only be assessed on what you have been taught and what you have learnt. So it's really, really essential that we consider as a school where those gaps are. And the last example is for art. So for art, it may be that it's based 100% on your portfolio work. And of course, we understand that completing something like art during lockdown, when perhaps you may not have had access to all the materials you need, means that there will be some parts of the portfolio perhaps you have not been able to complete as well as you have wanted to. They're the kind of things we will look at and we'll make judgments about in terms of what aspects of the portfolio we look at to determine your grade. But as I said, for all three of those examples I've given, they're just potential ways that we might approach your different subjects, and you will be receiving further information about how we will definitely be approaching your subjects in due course. So I'm now going to be addressing some common questions, and these are questions that I'm sure many of you have and things that we really want to make sure that we have been really clear about. So the first one is, well, how will we as a school ensure that students at Thamesview have been treated fairly? There are multiple ways that we are going to make sure that you are treated fairly. The first thing is that we're working really closely with other local schools. So we're really exploring what other schools are doing, how they're going to be approaching exams and grading this year, and making sure that where possible, although we might not be doing exactly the same thing, we're in line with their approaches. You've also got to remember that your teachers and the leaders in the school are part of extensive networks of teachers and leaders across the whole country, and we are in contact with all sorts of people who work for exam boards, who work for other schools, who work for big trusts, and so we have access to huge amounts of information in terms of making sure that we are not doing anything hugely different to what other schools are doing. All schools, regardless of what they decide on eventually for their approach, have to follow the same guidance. So there's very little movement in terms of what we could do differently to other schools. We'll also be engaging with careful moderation with other schools. This means that when we've completed internal exams, or perhaps even before we set the exams, we'll be working with other schools to make sure that we're all in line with each other, and that when we have marked those papers, that we're all grading in the same way and grading fairly. It's important to remember that all schools have to evidence their approach. So it's not just a case that any one school can say, well, we're just going to assess our students on this one tiny topic and that's the end of it. Because we have to provide evidence, and schools will be checked on that evidence. It's also really important for you to know that your grades can only be based on solid evidence. They cannot be based on personal opinion or personal judgment of an individual. That can't happen, okay? So the outcomes that you achieve with your internal exams, assessments, or however we decide as a school we're going to be assessing you, that's what counts. And finally, we're also working towards finding a way to make sure that when you complete internal assessments, these are anonymous. This will mean that when teachers are marking, there will be no concerns over any teacher having unconscious bias towards individuals. So it can't be a case that a teacher would, without realising, mark their students higher than other students because we won't know whose papers belong to who. A second common question is around the protection that you have as a student. Now, many of you might be wondering kind of if you're not happy with the grades that you receive, or if you're not happy with the approach, what can you do for yourself? Well, first of all, you have the opportunity to let us know of anything or any factors that might be useful for us in terms of how your learning has been affected over the past year. So if you found that you were particularly unwell, or there was a different situation that meant that you were unable to engage with certain parts of learning and you had legitimate reasons around that, you would be able to tell us, and we would be able to take that into account and look at what we could do there to support you. Secondly, once you've received your results, there are two possible things that you could appeal. The first one is that you could appeal to the school, and that would mean that we would have to check that we haven't made a clerical error. So if you received a certain grade and you thought that it was completely so far apart from what you were expecting, you could ask us to check that we hadn't made a mistake. The second thing you can do is that you can appeal to the exam board. And what that would mean is that they would then go back and review the evidence that we have used to reach your grade. So it can't be a case that you don't work hard, you don't revise, and then you get a grade you're disappointed with, and then say, well, I'll appeal to the exam board, because they'll go back and look at what we use to reach that grade. Okay? So if that's something that you are unhappy with once you receive those results, you have to be really certain that the evidence base that has been provided, so your internal tests and assessments and so on, show your very best work. And it's really important to remember with appeals that results can go up, they can go down, and they can stay the same. And if a result does go down, that is the result that you end up with. They don't leave you with the highest grade. And that's the situation every single year, regardless of whether we've been through lockdown or not. Okay, so I'm going to finish with some final messages. The first one is that it is just so important for you to maintain your motivation and stay focused on your learning. As you saw at the very start of this video, there are really only a few weeks left this term and after the Easter holidays for you to need to prioritise your learning. So the end is in sight, you just need to keep going. Secondly, respect the rules of the classroom to ensure that everyone has the best chance of success. You know that we have a really firm behaviour policy in our school now, and we will not be adapting that policy for students taking exams in order to try and keep you in the classroom if your behaviour has led to you needing to be sent out. We have to prioritise effective learning, and that's where our priority is, on making sure that everyone has the opportunity to learn. If you are being disruptive or if you are not following instructions, that's attention that the teacher is having to take away from the learning of the class to focus on you and your poor decisions. Now, we know that we have fantastic students in this year group, and that the very, very majority of you are really respectful of learning. And so we're really looking forward to seeing you continue with that back in lessons this week. The third thing is that we need you to be patient and to allow us to make decisions about subject-specific approaches. It's not worth asking teachers for their opinions on what's happening or what they are going to be deciding, because that will just slow the process down. We want to make these decisions as quickly as we can, but also as robustly as we can, to make sure that we're giving you the very best chance of success. And the last thing is work hard, follow instructions, and please speak up if you need help. This is absolutely the time to be prioritising yourself, your future, and your outcomes. So if there's something you need or a concern that you have, please speak to whichever member of staff in the school you feel most comfortable to speak to, so that we can find a way forward to deal with whatever concern or query you have. So, as I said before, there will be further information coming out to you about subject-specific guidance and how we'll be deciding the grades in each subject. In the meantime, the best thing you can do is just be completely committed to your learning and do your very best. Thank you.